My first computer was one of the very first Dells with MMX. And this is a very old school thing. This was an old thing that Intel really messed up. They did something called MMX, which was meant to be some Intel Inside Tech thing that was making the chip better. It didn't really have that much of an effect on anything. But nevertheless, that was my first computer. It was technically one my dad used, but man, that thing cooked. And I put one of the first 3DFX graphics cards in there. Voodoo's 3500, 3800. Eventually would upgrade to a 5500. And what was fun about the 5500 was it had a picture of a game called Halo on the back, which would never actually launch on the PC. Well, it would eventually, but that was just before Microsoft was like, nope, we're putting that on the Xbox, which did not exist at the time.
Is that like so you got a Dell, but is that the computer that like sat in the like living room? So
Yes, it
yes.
sat in the living room.
What was the first
So,
what was the first computer that was yours, Ed's only?
personal computer that was mine only. I got like a Dell Inspiron. My dad got me one a few years later, and I was like, maybe I think it was like 11 or 12. It was just a bog standard Inspiron. You couldn't really run much on it. It was before mobile graphics were great. You could do EverQuest on it, but it was not happy doing it. It was quite pissy. You had to play the lowest possible settings on everything, and even then it still chugged a bit. Okay, so I do actually remember that. It was my dad's, I was in Wales. Parents used to, in the summer holidays, we used to go to Wales. And my dad had a gold PCMIA card. Is it PCMIA? It was a 33.46 kilobit dial-up connection plugged in. And I was able to goof off around on like CompuServe. That was how we connected at the time. And that was really my first experience online, like using just chat rooms and early BBS and eventually forums and like shareware game downloads as well. Two things. First of all, it was just web forums in general were what did it. But the first time I remember using something on the computer and saying, this is this is me. I have found my thing was playing Ultima Online. I was like 10 or 11 years old, getting my butt rocked by just every person because that game was completely PvP. So it was just you go and do a bunch of stuff, no guidance, no real tutorial, and then just someone would just land a giant demon on you and take all your stuff. Something about that was fascinating, that there was just this insane little world in the computer that I could be a part of and get destroyed in regularly. First console would have been the PS1, PlayStation 1. I did a lot of early PC gaming before that, but that was the first console my parents were like willing to let me use. I don't remember the exact model of it, but it was on Orange, which is a British, at the time was a British cell network, kind of like AT&T or used to be called Singular. But in England, it was this horrifying black and white. It was the kind of the green gray screen at the back and just black text over it. I think it had Snake. I'm honestly not sure. And it was just, it could do phone calls and it could do texts. If there was no camera, it was surprisingly heavy, very dense little creature. But you could throw that thing clear across the room. You could drop it on you. I think you could have shot at that thing and it would have survived. That thing, I don't remember it ever running out of power, partly because it really only had like three things it could actually do. It had a calculator. That was also a feature. So the funny thing is that I have for the longest time just used my name Ed Zitron because it sounds made up. Everyone thinks it's made up. People think I came up with Ed Zitron as my first screen name, and I stuck with it because it sounds made up enough, but also it is me. This is why I have like edzitron at gmail.com. It's why I have these because it's not a common name. There are other Zitrons out there, not just ones I have sired or been sired by. But yeah, Ed Zitron was just an early choice because it sounded futuristic anyway, and had the benefit of also being very memorable if you knew who I was. Oh God, that's a tough one. One of the earliest ones I can remember was like Aladdin. Remember Aladdin very fondly. I remember the last movie I saw in my local cinema, Baby's Big Day Out, just an insane movie about a baby getting lost in New York. That was we went in there, we were waiting for the movie to start, and they just did an announcement that the movie theater was shutting down. It then reopened under a different brand, so kind of anticlimactic. Maybe The Lion King. The Lion, I can't remember which came first, Lion King or Aladdin. I think those would be the first ones I remember.
Baby's Day Out, wasn't that who's the guy that did Home Alone and all those 80s movies?
Oh, I don't remember, but I think you might be. It was such a strange movie. Just
Yeah,
the concept of the movie is
maybe going
very,
out into the world and almost dying 1,000 times.
yeah, like, but not dying. I don't even remember the plot, just the idea very much bothered me and still does to this day.
John Hughes is the director that I'm.
Ah, yes. Yep. It was a copy of Pulp's A Different Class. Pulp are fantastic, but that was my first purchase. I love that album. That album still plays well today. Fantastic.
one of my
Jarvis Cocker rocks.
one of my favorite albums of all time.
One of the biggest weirdos in British music. Fame refused to change him. He like annoyed Michael Jackson at one point. Just he probably could have got in a lot of trouble. He just flitted around. But no, that album's brilliant. And it was actually, I think I bought my first single as well, might have been off that. It was Pulp's Misshapes.
Hmm.
And I remember people getting in trouble for that because inside it showed you how to turn the leaflet for the single into a little drug bag. And that was very
Oh, I
controversial for
didn't
the
know that.
time.
But wait, that's the one with Common People on it, right? Like, because that's
Correct.
yeah, yeah,
And Underwear, I believe, another
right.
classic.
Yes.
Blur in 1997, Wembley Arena. Fantastic. I think that was the Universal tour. Amazing. Absolutely amazing concert. First job I ever had was writing about video games. I wrote for a magazine called CVG Magazine, Computer Video Games Magazine. Now, technically, I was a work experience, so internship kid for a while. And I was very lucky. I lived with my parents. I was able to go and do this. And like I live with them and I could eat and live there. So I was very lucky to get that. But then after doing work experience a few times across the summers, they gave me some freelance work. And I realized I'm like the fastest B plus copywriter in the West, and they love that. So I ended up growing that out into a healthy freelance business at like 17, 18.
So like so sometimes I ask, what was your first entrepreneurial idea? That's it. That's sort of like it ties into your first job a bit.
First entrepreneurial idea. I mean, I didn't really have one of those until I was much older because I guess the closest you can get is when I was working at Future Publishing Group, who bought PC Zone, which was a magazine I then worked at later, but had been freelancing for when they were owned by Dennis Publishing. I realized that there are a lot of people on the floor who didn't want to do, and this is their choice, they didn't want to do the boring work. They didn't want to do a 50 quid box out thing that was kind of boring. I would do all of that. I was just like said to anyone who offered freelance work, I'm always available because I had no friends. I did not have friends in London. I still really don't. I have like one friend there, one from high school. And so I just did that. I just did as much freelance as possible. And it kind of is a force multiplier is the wrong word. It's kind of you get momentum when you've done enough and you've turned in copy on time without much editing. Enough people hear about that and they go, should I give it to this person I've worked with a few times or this guy who just churns it out regularly, reliably? And it was great. And I loved doing it. And it was a great job and I miss doing that. I also will add, I did games journalism before the real existence of Twitter. So I think that I would feel a little differently now if I'd done it during that because the way that games journalists are treated pretty bad. But I mean, the biggest and the first real entrepreneurial thing I did outside of my PR agency was the newsletter I did. I just started writing that, and that has turned into a whole series of things, including my new podcast. It's crazy. And it's just because I was like, I want to write all the time. Okay, the first time I really thought I could make it was I bought a Panasonic plasma TV when I could afford to do that, and I had enough money, and it didn't feel when my agency had got enough momentum, it was something nice I bought myself. But really, I think the moment was it was like 2012, and the agency had been going a few months, and I was kind of just sitting around working my general day, and I got a call from a bloke called Ilya who worked at a Y Combinator backed startup called AnyPerk, and he was like, "Oh, we want to work together." That call and that company I worked with led to pretty much all my Y Combinator work, led to my first major investor client, and that was the moment when I'm like, "Oh, I actually have a reputation now." And a lot of PR businesses are based entirely on reputation and honestly getting results. But ideally, you want both. But that was the moment where I was like, oh, wow, I have something there. And then only recently, really, did I feel like I could make it with anything media. The moment that this iHeartRadio thing came together was the first time I was like, oh, wow, I actually have something here, which is crazy because I've written like 350 different things on the newsletter at this point. And people like have been saying it's good for a while, but that was the moment, I guess. My first car was a Volvo S60. So I learned to drive when I was much, much older because I lived in London and New York. So two places you can get around without a vehicle. And then I learned to drive in Staten Island, New York, because I was moving to New Jersey with someone I was with at the time. And I had to learn to drive because you're not going to, New Jersey Transit does not go anywhere near where I was going to live. So I had to learn in Staten Island, but I needed just like the most straightforward car. And I had a few friends in
And
car
weirdly,
journalism, and
by
they
the
would
way, Staten Island, for those that don't know, is kind of the most rural part of New York City. Like,
yeah, it's very suburban,
yeah,
but also urban enough that driving there is not unindicative of the rest of the world. But all of my friends were just like, "You want a Volvo? You want a straightforward car, goes forward, backwards, side to side, nothing fancy." And that vehicle was a beauty. I had zero problems with that thing. That thing was a tank. It drove very well the first time I drove it, not amazingly, but very well, and then continued to drive very well until eventually I got rid of it when I moved to California. My favorite gadget, the one that I'm really fond of, that has its warts, but I love it, is the tonal. It's this giant magnet. It has big arms that you move around to do different exercises, and it has a screen in the middle that tells you what to do and it counts your reps. I love that thing. It is imperfect. It has its moments of problems. It is too expensive, but I use that so much and it's great and it actually builds muscle. It's brilliant. But also, it just does the exact thing I need it to, which is I want you to tell me what to do and I want you to count the reps so that I don't have to do any homework. I am so good with things like exercise when I am ordered around, when I'm told, like, I'm a big dumb monkey. Make me do the thing. Tell me the thing to do, and I will do it. And I am very fond of that thing. I am I'm a big fan of the fact that this thing works reliably, and I've used it so much. I've used it for years. A couple million pounds lifted on it now, and it just keeps working. I beat the crap out of it too. It's great.